Hi, this is Meghan Heritage with another episode of Positivity in Practice. And today I am here with my friend Brook Bisonet of Bisonet. And we're going to talk a little bit about all things real estate law. We are going to try to keep it positive and not talk too much about the things that go terribly wrong after people don't do the things that they can do to be preemptive inside of setting up wills and trusts. So if these are things that are interesting to you, we will be talking about that. Hi, Brooke. How are you?
Good. How are you, Megan?
I'm good. So I want to know just a little bit. I know that you, from an early age, knew that you wanted to be in the law space, and you went to undergrad where?
I went to undergrad at Alma College.
Okay. And then we
Go
left.
Scots.
Go Scots. Who's the big rival? Is it Hope?
Hope.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, we don't.
So sorry. And I love Peter Stursma. So we've had this conversation before, the Hope football coach. He's such a good guy. You would love him.
He wasn't there when I was there, so maybe I'd give him another chance. But man,
They had quite a season.
they did.
Just
Alma
saying.
had a great season last year, so
It's funny because you guys have similar personalities, and you're like all about, kids, and you're highly energetic human beings. So it'll be interesting when you guys finally meet sometime at my house and you decide you have to love him.
maybe it'll be Max on a recruiting visit or something like that.
Oh man, there you go. He's always looking at Henry. He's eyeballing my smaller son. Like he might be the one. So then we go to the University of Michigan Law.
Actually, Michigan State.
Michigan State Law.
I know. I was a Michigan fan growing up, and
I always get this wrong with you, don't I? Because you are diehard Michigan.
I am a diehard Michigan fan.
Okay.
I justified it because at the time it was Detroit College of Law. So
Yeah.
Detroit College of Law used to sit where Comerica Park sits now, and they tore it down and they moved to MSU's campus. And they were Detroit College of Law. So when I applied, it was Detroit College of Law. It was just at Michigan State.
Right.
By the time I graduated, I have a Michigan State degree.
Okay. My brother-in-law went there too, and my sister-in-law, and it was DCL, right?
Yes.
It was DCL then, and then my niece just graduated from Michigan State Law School. So
Okay.
he's now diehard green.
Yeah.
We say anything about Michigan, and he can't hang.
I could never switch my allegiances. It's just the way it was.
That's so funny too. And we have a good friend, Elizabeth Curtis, who went to both,
Yeah.
and she was still state.
So it's kind of funny. A lot of my friends that I went to law school with were Michigan undergrads, and they
Okay.
went to Michigan State for law school because they had a really good IP program, intellectual property, and they were all engineers that graduated from U of M and then went to Michigan State. So they all practice in the IP law now.
I always wonder what Corinne Curtis does when she went to Notre Dame undergrad and then Michigan law. Like, aren't those are the worst two rivalries, right? Or no?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Michigan State's not that great either. You know, so.
Brutal, yeah. And people are like diehard. Like they've got the sweatshirt on from Walmart, never went to the school, and they're just like, or Meyer or whatever, and they're just like, ready to eviscerate the other side. I'm like, I don't know. I tell my boys, like, just get the grades and get into one of them. They seem like they're both fantastic schools.
Yeah. And that's the thing is when I went, I grew up a Michigan fan, and I was going to go to U of M undergrad, and I got accepted, but then I went to to Alma College because I could play football.
Right. Yeah, that part. It's always about a girl or a sport, I feel like, somewhere
Yeah, no girl.
we go to. Well, the girl came later. But
Later.
So did you know real estate law? Did you know that you wanted to be in real estate and business?
When I went to law school, I didn't grow up knowing any lawyers. Like, there was none in my family. I just said I like to argue, so I might as well be a lawyer, kind of joking around. But then I went to undergrad and I did pre-law, and I was thinking about, maybe I'll go do, work for Pfizer and be a pharmaceutical sales rep. So I had applied there and had gotten an interview and was down to the final two, and they were still him-hawing around, and I had already been accepted to law school. So I kind of wanted to be like a sports agent. That was the thing that I really wanted to do when I went to law school. Yeah. So when I went to undergrad, I went with a bunch of guys whose parents were attorneys. Mm-hmm. And they knew what torts were, and they knew what civil procedure was, and they knew what all of these things were, and I didn't have any clue. Like, I'm like, what, I don't know what a tort is, and, but I learned.
You're probably going to have to say what a tort is now, because some people aren't going to know what a tort is. Tort law.
Yeah, it's the civil areas, like negligence, intentional infliction of emotional distress, battery, assault, all on the civil side. And I didn't know that stuff because I didn't grow up around it. And so when I went to law school, I tell this story because it's just something I didn't know. I grew up in a small town of Parma, Michigan, you know. I went to Elma for undergrad. I go to law school and they're like, the opening reception for the law, school, for the 1L, because you were a 1L, a 2L, and a 3L. Those are your 3 years. That's what they call you. So the 1Ls are coming in and we're going to have a champagne toast. And so I show up in a polo shirt, cargo shorts, and flip-flops. Everybody else is in suit and tie. And I'm like, yeah, this isn't Parma anymore, you know?
We've arrived.
Hey, we've arrived. And I'm like, okay, this is not what I thought. But my first year, I did well enough that they offered me a scholarship after my first year for law school, because my grades were I did so well. I ended up finishing in the top 12% of my class at Michigan State's law school. So I learned and I adapted. But going into it, I didn't know any of that. And I thought I'd get a corporate concentration and, eventually practice in Chicago is probably what I thought I was going to do. Because my undergrad was in business. So I was like, I'll be a business lawyer. And we had a professor, Clark Johnson, and he said, you be a corporate lawyer, you live at the top of the tallest buildings in New York, and you'll take a helicopter from building to building, your feet will never touch the ground. That's what he said. And that was what I wanted. I wanted to be big city attorney and live in Chicago or New York or something like that. But then I started practicing as an intern for a firm in Grand Rapids and learning that. And after my first year, I took the Michigan bar exam and got one of the highest scores in the state on the bar exam. But you take it in July, and you don't know until November whether you pass.
Yeah.
So in the midst of that, I met Crystal, and we started dating. And I told her, I go, if I don't pass the bar exam, I'm moving to Mexico. I'm just going to live on a beach and whatever. And she took that seriously. But I passed, and then the next year I took I took the Illinois bar. And for that I studied for 14 hours total, and I just went out and took it and passed. So I'm licensed in Michigan and Illinois, but I've never I'll handle a case or two a year out of Illinois just to keep my license. But then I practiced for a year in Grand Rapids, and the attorney that I practiced under did a lot of real estate law.
Okay.
So that's how I kind of started into that and learned under him. And he had done real estate law for years and years and years. And then the two associates that were there with me, we decided to leave and start our own practice in Grand Haven in 2008. And as a small firm, you kind of do everything you can do. Now, there are limitations. I don't really do criminal law. I don't do family divorce, but real estate is a big part of what we do because it touches so many things.
Yeah, you did a very successful case that was, what's that called? A wrongful termination.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she was I referred the client because I didn't know anybody that was doing wrongful termination, and she was so happy with you.
Yeah, I do a lot of employment law because there's not many plaintiff side firms on the Lakeshore that do employment law, and honestly, employment law in Michigan is hard. Yeah. Everybody's an at-will employee unless you've been discriminated against in some way. Then there's not much of a case. So they're very selective in what you can do on the employment side. But my first employment case was that firm in Grand Rapids that I worked for, and we helped out an individual pretty well who'd been discriminated against. So I do still handle a lot of that here on the Lakeshore.
So when we work together, generally it's obviously in the real estate space, and there's a few things that have been surprising to me, one of which is the changeover essentially from when we were a dower rights state to a community property state. Can you talk a little bit about that? Have you seen any confusion around that?
I honestly, we don't have much of that comes through our office as far as what what we're handling in regards to that. Most of our stuff is on the estate planning side.
Yeah.
So just making sure that property is transferred generationally in a fluid way that does not create problems for those who are inheriting it.
So let me remind you of the one that it was right after I think all of that happened. And because of everybody just thinking that property automatically passes from husband to wife when someone passes, and there was only one child that was still living, and there was a house. And because there was no will, no trust, no explanation of what happened when husband passed and wife was no longer able to hang on to the house, that son, was trying to navigate, you helped inside of that space. But I believe we ended up in a probate space. And I don't think people get that. I think that they think that if something were to happen to me, then John automatically gets all of my assets, and that's just how it goes.
Yeah. So in Michigan, if you do not have a will or a trust and you die intestate is what they call it, there is certain, the law is very specific as to how property transfers. So say you're in a situation where husband and wife are married. Wife is not on the deed to the house because husband bought it years ago, maybe before they got married, maybe after they got married. Sometimes they just put one spouse on the deed. They don't put the other one. So if you don't have a will that says everything goes to my wife, or a ladybird deed, which I can talk about in a minute, or a trust, then you die intestate. It states that a certain amount of the property goes to the spouse up to a certain dollar amount. And then after that, kids are entitled to it. So let's just say you're in a situation where you've had a falling out with a child, which sometimes we see.
Right.
And husband passes away. Wife is not on the deed. That property, she gets a certain amount of it, and maybe it's the entire amount because the property is only worth $100,000 or $200,000. But what if the property is worth $500,000? That son, who maybe you don't talk to anymore, or maybe you do talk to, but hey, he really wants some money out of this, says, you got to give me some of the value of this property. So then it needs to be sold and given to the child. That is something that can happen if it's not properly planned for. And you're like, well, I just have a house. That's not a big deal. Those are big deals because there are many implications that can happen. So a lot of times we put them into a trust, and the trust dictates how everything is handled. Sometimes people say, I don't want a trust, and we'll just do a ladybird deed. And what a ladybird deed is if it says, I retain full control of this property during my lifetime, but once I pass away, it goes to these people or to this trust or to this person. And you can spell it out who it goes to so that it doesn't have to go through probate. It doesn't have to be an intestate succession situation.
So imagine how much more complicated this gets, because we've seen this too when it wasn't a first marriage. And there are multiple children that are coming forward from multiple marriages, sometimes all saying a portion or a part of this is mine. Yeah. So I don't know that everyone understands the difference between a will and a trust. Yes. Can you hook us up there?
Yeah. So a will dictates who's in charge and where the property goes after you pass away, or where all of your assets go after you pass away. If you just simply do a will and you don't anything outside of that, then that has to go through probate. And what probate means is you go to the court, you file an application, and somebody is appointed essentially to stand in the person who passed away's shoes and sign documents on their behalf, sign a deed on their behalf, be the personal representative, or what we'd call the executor of the estate. If you have a trust, we can fund the trust with a ladybird deed or a quitclaim deed or other assignments of, your personal property into that trust. Once that person who is the subject of that trust passes away, the trustee, the new trustee, steps in without court involvement, without having to go through anything with the courts to sell the property, liquidate it, or transfer it in a way that the trust says to transfer it. So it kind of gives the same instructions as a will, but is a separate standing entity that does not have to go through probate in order to dispose of the assets.
In a really elementary way, I always think of it like a box, and like you put the things inside of the trust so that there's nothing outside of it that isn't in the box by the time that you're done with a decision about how it all moves forward.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times sometimes I've seen create trusts and then they just don't fund it. So it's just sitting there empty. So we make sure that people create the trust, then fund the trust to make sure it's in the proper spot so that they can then be sure that their loved ones, when they leave, are taken care of and everything is clean and easy to do.
And then when we transfer property, will often do a recertification of the trust. Can you talk about what that is?
Yeah, so if you go to sell the property later on, the title company will ask for a certificate of trust existence and authority. That's just a document that any attorney can, if they have a copy of the trust, can look at and say, this trust is still in existence, it's still good, still holds the property. These are the people that are in charge. These are the people that created it. And that gives the title company the authority to make sure that things are being transferred in the right way.
Especially when they're like, I had one the other day, it was originally written in 2002, right? And then it hadn't really been updated, I think, once in 2012. And then, just to sort of make sure that the chain is still the way that it was supposed to be long term. And then, so what would you say are the biggest mistakes that you see that could have been prevented had somebody come in and taken care of these things on the front end with you?
Well, one of the things I see from an estate planning standpoint is not getting the documents that are important while you're alive. So your medical power of attorney, what we call patient advocate designation, or a living will, to determine who's going to make medical decisions for you if you're alive but can't do it for yourself, and a financial power of attorney, because those are situations that are more like immediate emergent situations. My spouse is in the hospital and is in need of medical care, needed decisions that need to be made, and I don't have the document in place. And the hospital or the doctor is telling me, you don't have any authority to make any decisions on this because I don't have the document that's in place. So now I have to go to the court and I have to get a hearing in front of a judge to explain with a doctor's certification that this person cannot make decisions for themselves. If they had just come in and had that document drafted and signed, then it's a much simpler process. We send it over. They know that they can make medical decisions for me if I can't for myself. So I think that's one of the things that people, they think of, okay, my trust or my will, but really those other two documents are super important when somebody is in an emergency medical situation.
So will, trust, medical durable power of attorney.
And financial power of attorney.
I can say just from personal experience, and I know you went through this with me, it was really kind of you, because my whole family is attorneys. My brother-in-law, my sister-in-law, my niece now, my cousin who's my best friend, my father-in-law. It would be one heck of a divorce. That was kind of the joke at my wedding. Both of my best friend, who was also my cousin, was my maid of honor, and then my brother-in-law, who's an attorney, was our best man. And those are our two co-executors of the trust and will, and that you put together for us. The thing that I wish that I would have spent more time on with my own father, who wrote his will in 1981 and then never updated it, is that updating space. And I've seen this now with clients multiple times where They didn't have a conversation about what to do if someone is incapacitated, what to do if someone isn't living in the way that they would choose to live. And for me in Canada, you have three really strange choices, or at least I had three really strange choices, as my uncle is the executor of the will and in charge of everything, me, the sole beneficiary, and me as his next of kin to make all medical decisions for him. So Canada, stroke rehab, my dad had a massive stroke where maybe someday he would be able to move his big toe again, which would not have been the way that he wanted to live. Palliative care, or what we would call hospice, and then they have another form for physician-assisted suicide. So if anybody's out there listening and isn't incredibly clear on what their responsibilities are, I do think that going to somebody like you allows the space for those conversations to happen in a safe way. You did a really good job, I feel like, with John and I when we were talking about custody of our children if something were to happen with both of us. And don't do it the way that we did it, because we had almost everything done, but then before we were done, we were getting on a really small puddle jumper plane in like Costa Rica or Belize or something, and we were firing on Brooke saying, can you just draft this thing really quick just in case something happens to us or something happens to the boys while we're out of the country so that our family can take care of them? What's advice just around all of that?
I think anytime there's a big life event, you should really look at what your decisions were prior. Crystal and I, every time we go on a trip, it's like, better look at our estate plan and make sure who's in charge and who's going to take care of our kids is what we want. So anytime there's a big life event or you're traveling or something like that, it's always good to look at it and see. You talked about from the real estate side, what is something you've seen that is really important to understand and to think about. And I think the biggest thing is when you're selling your home is to be honest on your seller's disclosure statement.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of people get caught because they weren't completely honest on that seller's disclosure statement. That's a representation you're making to the buyers about the condition that you know of the house. Mm-hmm. We had a situation where somebody lied about termites.
Yep.
And my clients moved into the house, and the next month the termite company knocked on the door and said, "We're here for your next treatment." And they're like, "Well, what are you talking about?" He's like, "Oh yeah, your house has been treated for termites for the past 2 years." Put the seller in a really precarious situation because they weren't honest about it. So I think from the will and estate standpoint, that's one thing is the updates. But from the real estate standpoint, which kind of is your area, is being honest on that seller's disclosure statement.
Yeah, and I'll go back when I'm making an offer on a property, especially a property of a certain vintage. I will go back and look at the 3 previous seller's disclosures and see what those owners said about the property. And it's no big deal. I mean, anybody can ask their real estate agent to provide them with any seller's disclosures that they have. And when they don't match up, it gets really weird, where you have to start to figure out, did that person not disclose? Did this person not disclose? But I know many cases that you've worked on over the years that I've been doing this where somebody ended up paying an exorbitant amount of money that they wouldn't have had to pay had they not lied in the first place. And this idea, I think, of buyer beware, it just doesn't work when you knowingly are withholding information about the physical condition of the property in a malice sort of way.
And maybe even in a very like benign sort of way. Like, I'm just not going to disclose that there was water in the basement last month. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a big deal. Well, it's a big deal to the buyer when then the next month it floods and you had some knowledge of it, even if it was little and you didn't disclose it or you downplayed it, or you had a company come out and tell you that they recommend that the whole foundation be redone. Those are the things that you might look at it and be like, that wasn't that big of a deal.
Right.
Well, somebody else thinks it's a big deal. And then when you start to get into a debate as to whether it was a big deal or not, you're already in the losing situation.
Oh yeah, I'm like disclose, and they're like, well, does the furnace leaking count as water in the basement? I'm like, right, furnace leaked in 2021, has not leaked since 2021.
Yeah,
Just say it, and then they can do an additional investigation if they want to do an additional investigation. Why not?
exactly.
I think that a lot of people think that this will and trust situation is just really expensive.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about? It's hard to say what a normal, somebody who doesn't own multiple companies and doesn't have all kinds of things going on, maybe just has a home and some kids, and what's a range?
Yeah, you're typically, most people that come to our firm are in the $1,800 to $2,500 range to do up to a trust, with all those documents and really get you in place. Now, if you've got a lot of other tax planning to do or something like that, it could be more, but most people are right in that range.
And then when those are in place on the front end, do people just call you and say you're the attorney for, that was my thing when Brooke and I had a dear friend that passed, and it made me think about, if anything happens to me, who do I want John in the room with?
Yeah.
And I was very specific about like who our investment planner is, who our attorney is. So what happens in that moment? They call you and say, you're the attorney for my parents or my family's trust?
Yeah. So a lot of times when we provide the documents to the individual, we give them the originals back and we keep copies of them. And when they have the originals, it'll have our name on it or our firm's name on it. So a lot of times that's how they get in touch with us if something were to happen to their family member.
So there's probably very minimal cost on the back end.
If you do it right, yes, very minimal.
Right. So if they come to you on the front end, then on the back end, it's going to be, this is what your family member laid out, and this is how it's going to work, and this is how it's going to execute, and then off you go.
Yeah. And I tell people that, you're going to spend a little bit more on the front end, but you'll save a lot of hassle for your family members on the back end. And most people are like, good, let's take care of it now. You get a client every once in a while, they'll be like, I'll be dead, I don't care. But that's very rare that happens.
Yeah, having done an international estate workout and ended up with an international CPA and attorney and all of these things, like, please care. Please just care a little bit so that you can figure the whole thing out and get that executor in place and do the things that need to be, done to not have it be, because you're grieving, and then you have a mess on top of it. And I don't think people really recognize the position that puts the family member who loved you and has lost you in.
Absolutely. I mean, it's to have to deal with that on top of grieving is too much.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so there's a lot of other things that Brook can do in general. He does. We've done adverse possession. We've done conversations, at least, around eminent domain. Those are things that are interesting, that pop up, that you just Google those if you've got a situation like that. I think we've done buildings over lot lines at one point or another. Surveys are really important when you're purchasing something and you can't figure out where exactly buildings are on lot lines. Certainly property line disputes is something that you've done. I know you've done builder situations where something didn't work out on either the builder side or the client side. Pretty much anything real estate related or family trust related. And then another, side of what you said in the HR space. Is there anything else that you're doing? I know you don't want to, like, friends and family divorce on the side or something like that, but is there anything else we're missing?
I do a lot of business formation.
Oh, you do? Yeah. You built my LLCs
and nonprofit formation. So anybody that wants to get a 501c3 established, we can do that with the IRS. And we do mergers and acquisitions. So that's a big fancy word, M&A, but it's really buying and selling businesses.
Yeah.
We've done a number of those different scenarios of somebody's selling to one of their employees, somebody's selling to a third party that came in, somebody's selling to a child or another relative. So just helping people through that process of making sure it transfers the right way and they're protected.
Yeah. So my favorite thing of you or about you in the real estate space is you will often say, yeah, that's not really necessary. And, kind of keep it positive we have a friend who one time said, and you know this friend, but it could be argued that. And so I love this phrase out of an attorney. It could be argued that. Well, it could be argued that the sky is purple. It could be argued. So many things could be argued. Just ask my 11-year-old last night. There were a million things that could be argued. I feel like one of the ways that you really keep it positive is just saying, that's not necessary, or let's just do this instead. Or do you really let me break this down for you and tell you the amount of time, energy, effort that's going to go into it's usually been a procuring cause space, right? Or something in real estate where you've done a ton of work on something and either you want to extract or the client wants to extract. They're rare for me. But I think that your way of being able to look at it and say anybody can sue anybody for anything, but what do you really want to do with your time?
Yeah, I feel like it's an attorney's job to sit down there with a potential client or a client and say, this is the cost and benefit of doing these things. And if it costs me like a litigation scenario where I can make a lot of money, that's fine, because I'm here to give the client the best advice possible for them, not for me. And I think that's where we lose sight a lot of times is like, okay, what's the benefit to me as the attorney? What should I do in this situation? Well, that's not necessarily what the benefit is to the client. And if I can look at the client and be like, you're going to lose a lot of sleep over this. Mm-hmm. You're going to spend a lot of time dealing with this. Just go out and get a different client and do that and be done and move on. It's going to be way better for your mental health. It's going to be way better for your just life if you can move on from that particular situation and spend your time and energy on a different person that can maybe make you the money back.
Yeah, my father-in-law said one time, if you want to start arguing principle, just set buckets of money on my desk. And you put this together for me. I said something to you that was like, well, Jesus said to turn the other cheek. And then you said, he also said, do you remember?
No, I don't.
Pay your debts to Caesar. And so I'm always you know what I mean? It's just such a really good way to be like, okay, so is this a turn the other cheek moment, or is this no, pay your debts to Caesar? Like you've put yourself in this situation. You've lied on the seller's disclosure. You've done whatever it is that you shouldn't have done. And now I'm in a hardship situation because of your actions. So I felt like that was just such a beautiful way, where I was all low and humble and like, oh, I just need to turn the other cheek. And you're like, hang on a second. He flipped some tables too, to just go through that. I love that.
Yeah, and I think there are times where you render to Caesar what is Caesar's, and there are laws that we live by, and you can't just be taken advantage of all the time. Once in a while, you got to stand up and be like, all right, this wasn't a right situation, and there's laws about this type of stuff, and I should be able to protect myself.
Yeah, and I feel like you keep it positive by, like, we always go through this gyration when we're talking about things on either side, legal, moral, and ethical, right? Where are we inside of this? Is this my feelings, like Better Call Saul or whatever, like sue me, I'll sue you and all of this? Or is this really, something that's going to be worth time and energy and effort? You're so good at that. You're so good at being like, okay, let's just look at the entire picture, get out of the soccer goal where the balls are getting kicked at your head. So I would say to anybody that is just wanting to sort of unpack a situation, you're not exorbitantly expensive. You really do make this very fair for clients. I've had several that have called you and just had a quick conversation with you that is, $0 or $100 or whatever. This isn't some kind of thing where you have to go in and sign up for a $1,500 retainer just to tell your story. So I appreciate that about you a lot. I know not every attorney is that way.
Yeah. We try to do things so that we don't want there to be a barrier to entry to get legal advice. So there's a lot of times we do free consultations all the time. And I'll be honest with people. Like, if you don't need my services, I will tell you you don't need my services.
Yeah.
I don't like situations where people get a bill and they're disappointed as to what they got from me. So I probably bill less than I should, just because I don't want to like be in a situation where people are upset.
Yes. I don't want to be in that situation either. And I like our conversations where I'm like, let me know when I've asked too many questions and I've now retained you. Thank you, Brooke. Thank you for being here. Thank you for helping people to unpack this. If you heard something today, Brooke is right downtown, Grand Haven on Washington. Firm's name is Guinan Bisonet, and you can look him up. We'll link all of his contact information in this podcast. And try to take care of these things so that your family doesn't have to take care of them later. It's just what's fair and what's right. Thank you.
We hope that you enjoyed today's podcast. If you're like me and you're looking for positivity in practice, please like, follow, or subscribe to find more people who are being positive.